In today's video, I'd like to talk a little bit about different forms of writing and kind of what counts as writing. For a bit of background on this, I, as a child, would have been classed as a reluctant reader. When I was probably about 7 or 8, I finished learning how to read. The teacher said I could read whatever book I wanted to, and I didn't see the point in reading anymore. Because, I mean, to be fair, the school system is quite bad in that it teaches reading for learning instead of reading for fun. And to be fair, I'd probably still say I'm a bit of a reluctant reader these days. But what I kind of want to talk about is what is classed as reading. Because when I was growing up, and I mean, it's gotten better these days, but it's still very much in that, you need to read a book. And a book is considered reading. They don't really talk about different forms of reading and writing. As a kid, I got into D&D. My parents used to play it. They'd have some friends come around once a week and they'd play a game. Little David was quite interested in this, and so I asked my parents if I could play. And my dad turned around and said, "You can when you're 10, but you'll have to read the rulebook." Around my 10th birthday, went up to my dad and said, "I'm 10 now, give me the rulebook." So he did, and I read it all. And, this is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So, 2nd edition, which had an extremely complicated rule set. It's not like it is today. And I read the whole thing. Cover to cover. Didn't take me that long. Understood it all. And, I mean, to this day, I understand 2nd edition rules more than I understand the latest ones. So, as a reluctant reader, I read an entire complicated rulebook. And then, as I got on more, I read all of the different books. I read the monster manual cover to cover, to the point of where I still remember some of the monsters in there as well. I mean, this is 20 years ago. I was a bit obsessed with it as a kid. But to teachers, that didn't count as reading. And then when, I started playing D&D, and then I started progressing into computer games, especially ones that were based on D&D, like Baldur's Gate. Fantastic game. If you haven't played it, you should go and play it. And there is so much reading involved in that game. You have to read all of the dialogue. I mean, you basically have to read the instruction manual as well at this point, because it's not particularly intuitive of how to play the game, and the tutorial isn't particularly much help. Does that count as reading? Because I would argue it does. I'm reading and I'm understanding, and I'm increasing my comprehension, which is the benefit of reading from an educational standpoint. But from a writing standpoint, I'm also understanding about story structure, because I love the story of Baldur's Gate, and I think that it has quite a lot of merits in terms of storytelling. It's not going to win any prizes for its writing. It is quite cliched, but there's nothing wrong with it. The sequel as well has quite strong writing. And, moving into modern days, lots of modern day games have really good writing in them. Lots of them don't, but they have good storytelling. I mean, even, Call of Duty Black Ops, the first one, I haven't played any of the others. I found myself being really engaged by that story. And I mean, that's a first-person shooter, which isn't something you traditionally think has a good story. I really enjoyed the story of Black Ops, to the point of where I played it a couple of times. The point I want to make, the point I'm trying to make, is that you can learn. I mean, everyone says, you have to read if you want to be a writer. No one talks about what classifies as reading. Do you have to pick up a book and read that? Is that the only thing that counts as reading in order to, become a better writer? Or can you look at different forms of media? No one, when they're talking about, I want to become a writer, they don't talk about reading comic books or graphic novels or playing video games as a way to learn how to tell a story, unless you want to become a writer in that field. If you want to become a comic book writer, then people will tell you to become to read comic books, to learn how it's done. But you can learn a lot from all of the different forms of media, and you can really become a better writer by understanding how to do things differently in different mediums. It's one of the reasons, I tell people that even if you want to be a fiction writer, like a novel writer, you should write poetry, because you're learning how different things work. And at the end of the day, no matter what story you want to tell, all you are doing is telling a story that people engage with. And from a writing perspective, the writing in, say, a video game is no less meritorious than writing a book. I would engage with the story of Baldur's Gate over anything Dickens has ever written. Every day of the week. I mean, I have done, to be fair. I've read very little Dickens, because it's quite boring. does that mean that one is better than the other, or are they just different mediums to tell a story? And I think that's something that we've got to get out of the habit of saying that, oh, you have to read a book. I know, especially in like the school system, they're very strict in, if you want to read, you have to read some of the classics. You have to read, Dickens and Shakespeare. And my God, I had to read Shakespeare for GCSE English, and I slept through most of those English classes because it was so boring. Whereas if they started talking about analysing the story of a video game, I would have been a lot more interested. And I probably would have learned a lot more from it, rather than having to learn a lot of storytelling and writing myself. I would have engaged with the school system a lot more in English if it had been interesting and modern, and they had accepted that different forms of storytelling are just as valid as each other. There is a divide in storytellers about what counts as storytelling. We're all very secular in our fields. You have poets who say, poetry's so much harder than writing short stories and, should be valued more. And you have short story writers saying, it's just a poem, it's 20 lines, it's not hard, you can do that really quickly. I have met most of these people that, say these sorts of things, people who only count the classics as literature. Whereas, as I've said, some of the writing in some of the video games I've played is a hell of a lot better than Dickens, I find. What constitutes good writing is incredibly subjective. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that reading and writing is all about storytelling. When you're reading, you're taking part in a story. When you're writing, you're creating a story. And different forms of that are just as valid as each other. And as well, in this day and age, it's really easy to write for video games. There are so many tools out there to make your own game, that are relatively user-friendly. And yeah, you're not ever going to be able to make, a Spider-Man game. One, because you'd get sued, and two, because it's a bit more complicated than that. But you can make good games. So just because, if you want to write video games, go write a video game. If you don't know how to program, to be fair, it's not that hard. You can write for a video game nowadays if you want. Whereas back in, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to write for a video game, you had to get hired by a studio. There weren't people doing it independently. It's largely the same as if you want to write TV or movies. Film it yourself. Everyone's got basically a studio camera in their phone these days. Go write a script and film it. Get your friends together and film it. It's not going to be great, just in terms of like the acting quality. But do it. Put it on the internet. Put it on YouTube. If that's what you want to do, go write a comic book. I don't know that much about how you distribute comic books independently. I assume there is a way. But there are so many tools available out there for you to do what you want to do, for you to become the writer you want to be. So go and do it. It's just as valid as everything else. If you want to write for video games, go do it. You want to write movies, go do it. The guy who wrote Saw did like an 8-minute short film for Saw, and look at him now, he's got quite a good career. And that came from him just making a little film, basically with a camera he had at home, with some friends. The barrier to entry in basically all forms of writing and media these days is non-existent. You can do it if you want to do it. So go do it, and have fun with it. And don't let people tell you that your medium is less valid than their medium, because it isn't. Writing in any medium is just about telling a story. That's why we do what we do. We just want to tell stories. The only thing that changes is how we tell them. So go and experiment. Go play around with things. Or if you're not sure what writing you want to do, go and write for different mediums. Go try writing a comic book. You can make doodles instead of artwork if you're not a very good artist. Write a video game. There is a lot of opportunity out there, and there is a lot of scope to learn and develop your own skills and to become the writer you want to become. So go do it and have fun. And that's where I'm going to end this. This one was a bit kind of like ranty and just saying all different media are good and as valid as each other. But I think it's something that needs to be said, and I think it's something that is quite important for people to understand, especially if you're new to the writing business. You will come across lots of division among the different forms and what people think of the different forms. Tell them to go to hell if they say your medium isn't as valid as theirs. That kind of nonsense has no place in the writing community. It's still here, unfortunately, but it doesn't. Go write stuff. Doesn't matter how you write it, you're telling a story. So I'm going to leave that there. leave me some comments. I don't know what you're commenting about, but just leave me some. Say hello. I will probably reply and say hello back. Make sure you're subscribed so you get more wonderful insights from me. And I will see you in the next video.